On February 10th, a message appeared in a Bitcoin wallet linked to the Nancy Guthrie ransom letters. It said, "We're ready to talk. Contact us." The other side never responded. Not publicly. And today, on day 87, there's still no named suspect. No confirmed location and no clear explanation as to why everything went completely silent after that message was sent. But what this episode is about is what investigators have been doing during that deafening silence. You had some questions about the new information that has come to light in the Nancy Guthrie investigation, and about some of the data I've gotten from a few of the profilers I was able to speak with. And I wanted to see from your perspective as an agent how you'd actually put all of that into action within the ongoing investigation. But the first thing I wanted to ask you about is this new information coming from Brianna Whitney, a reporter at the CBS station in Phoenix. And that's precisely one of the stations that received the first 2 ransom letters from the kidnapper. The ones Savannah was referring to when she said that in her judgment, 2 of them were real. Now they're reporting that upon checking the Bitcoin wallet, there was activity on February 10th and no movement since. So this would have happened a couple of months ago, right when the letters first became public. A small amount of money was deposited into the account, along with a note saying, "We're ready to talk. Contact us." And then there was a link indicating how to contact them. There's no way to know with complete certainty whether it was the FBI or Savannah Guthrie. But it would seem that in a way, it would make a lot of sense. What do you think it means that they put that note out there? But apparently there was no response afterward. Well, I don't think we know whether there was a response that wasn't visible to us. I think it's the FBI saying something. If it was the FBI, which makes sense, it's their way of saying, hey, we're in the middle of a negotiation here. This isn't going to be something where we play your game by letting you alone dictate the terms, because that's what this comes down to. This is their only mother. They want her back, so you'd better accept our conditions. And they would say, we're your only victims, so if you don't get money from us, you're not getting a single cent. So we're both in this zero-sum game. This is something big, and there's room to maneuver in negotiating. I guarantee you not in every case, but it really depends on how you decide to carry out the entire negotiation. If you start out, and I know it sounds horrible, but it's like negotiating the price of a house or a vehicle, where if you walk in and seem desperate, they're not going to budge an inch. If they come in and seem, desperate to get her back, but unwilling to set a precedent for future serious crimes down the line, then you're forcing them to negotiate. I think the FBI was telling them this isn't a process where you make demands and we meet them. This is a negotiation, and that's how it's going to work. Brian Entin started that conversation on day 79. We're now on day 87. Between that episode and this one, the investigation has taken directions that hadn't fully connected until this very moment. If you've been following this case with us from the start, you already have the foundation you need. For those joining us for the first time, the previous episodes cover everything you need to know about the start, the crime scene, and the first confirmed evidence. Right now, we're picking up the investigation from where it currently stands. Here's what we know about the last confirmed moments before Nancy disappeared. She was dropped off at her home in Catalina Foothills, Tucson, Arizona, at approximately 9:50 p.m. on January 31st. The next morning, she didn't show up for the scheduled live broadcast at her church. When her family members arrived at the house around 11 a.m. and didn't find her, they called 911 at noon. What investigators found upon arrival set the tone for everything that followed. Her phone was still inside the home. Her medication was still in the house. Her shoes, too. The back doors had been left wide open by someone. And on the front porch, blood was analyzed that confirmed Nancy's DNA. At 1:47 a.m., the doorbell camera was disconnected. At 2:12, motion was detected, but there was no footage. At 2:28, her pacemaker stopped syncing with her Apple devices. Whatever happened there happened between 1:47 and 2:28 in a window of 41 minutes. Before we continue, if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button right now. Reconstructing step by step the last known hours before everything changed forever. This case is still active, and we cover every development as it happens. Subscribe, and you won't miss what's coming next. Within days of Nancy's disappearance, something unusual happened. Ransom notes started arriving. They didn't reach the police or the family privately. They were sent directly to local television stations. TMZ received one. 2 Tucson news channels received others. The letters demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin. They set 2 deadlines, February 5th and February 9th. Both dates passed with no confirmed payment of any kind. There was no public follow-up from the senders. But on February 4th, a man named Derek Colella appeared. Colella sent text messages to the Guthrie family. The text simply said, "Did you get the Bitcoin yet?" They arrested Colella. He confessed he was following the case on TV, and that's how he got the family's information. He had no connection to the kidnapping. His trial is scheduled for June 23rd in court. But that fraudulent message was unrelated to the ransom letters sent to the media outlets. And those letters, according to Savannah Guthrie herself, were of a very different nature. She publicly stated that she believed 2 of the notes were legitimate. This brings us straight to February 10th. CBS Phoenix, which received the original letters, confirmed there was activity inside the virtual wallet. Movement was detected in the linked Bitcoin account. There was a small transaction, and with it, a message. "We're ready to talk," from a pecking link. No one officially confirmed who the sender was. By understanding how the FBI operates in kidnapping cases, the answer becomes extremely clear. It wasn't a payment. It was a clear signal. To understand that code, we need to listen to an expert. Does it surprise you that neither the FBI nor the Guthries have attempted a new outreach yet? It doesn't surprise me. Although, of course, I don't know what information they're working with. Maybe it would surprise me. At the FBI, there's always a case agent, a supervisor, and then the chief. The process moves up through the assistant special agent in charge and goes straight up to the top of the chain of command. I'd be very surprised if there weren't internal disagreements about what the best strategy to follow is. I've never been in a situation without conflicts. Someone will always say this whole thing sounds crazy. Just pay them. What do we have to lose? Well, in this criminal investigation, we risk losing everything. We put the victim at risk, and we set a dangerous precedent. Both positions have solid arguments. How much do you think they consult with the family before deciding whether to contact them again? They'll consult them before every major move, and even on many details that seem insignificant. But the Guthries won't be in the FBI conference room when the final strategy is decided. Think about it this way. It's similar to someone facing trial who has the support of an attorney. That attorney is a legal expert who has handled this kind of crime many, many times before. But if the defendant decides to plead guilty, there's no way to make him change his mind. At the end of the day, the decision rests with the defendant. In FBI training, this is made very clear. When working on these kidnapping cases, you act as direct support for the victims. You try to help them while at the same time you're trying to capture the person responsible for this terrible crime. It all comes down to what's more important, catching the captor or recovering the victim safely. That's the dilemma. I used to argue that in reality there's no difference at all. If you rescue the victim, you catch the kidnapper. If you catch the kidnapper, you rescue the victim. What I just described is not a traditional negotiation. It's a pure exercise in control. The FBI wasn't responding to a demand. They were establishing that there'd be no deal without a conversation first. They were telling whoever was on the other end, "You don't set the rules, we both lose here." And then complete silence. No counteroffers, no proof of life, no follow-up messages. That channel that opened on February 10th was never used again, at least not publicly. That silence isn't a dead end. It's valuable information that reveals something specific to investigators. It describes the profile of the suspects being sought. 10 days after Nancy was reported missing, the FBI released images of a masked individual 5'9" to 5'10" in height, who was carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack, a product sold only at Walmart with a visible gun holster, moving calmly with no rush or panic. Walmart records were demanded in an attempt to trace the purchase of the backpack. But this was what intrigued investigators about the ransom message. Beyond the silence, real kidnappings follow a pattern. Criminals apply pressure. Everything escalates fast. They remind the family what's at stake, because their goal is to keep that emotional pressure constant. Each hour that passes without the demands being met is supposed to be unbearable. That wasn't the case here. There was never proof of life. Not a photo, not a video, not a single verifiable proof that Nancy was still alive after being taken from that house. The deadlines came and went. And when the FBI opened communication on February 10th, the other side maintained complete silence. For a former FBI agent accustomed to cases identical to this one, that pattern has a specific name. I just think that, from the Guthrie's perspective, it seems like not much is happening at this very moment. From what we know from our internal sources, they're not making significant progress in the current investigation. They don't seem to know who the man who took Nancy is or exactly what happened to her. And this could be their only real link. If Savannah says she believes those two are authentic, I don't know if I'd be able to resist if it were my mother. I'd say let's get into that Bitcoin account right now. Even now, lying awake at night, you'd think to hell with it. I'll put more money in there just to see what actually happens. Exactly. And I think some would say that puts you in a position of clear operational disadvantage. If the captor had Nancy alive and wanted to return her, he'd be the one contacting the FBI directly. I don't think it would help much. If the kidnappers were willing to negotiate, they would have taken the bait from the very first offer made. Of course, that doesn't mean they didn't. My problem here is the kidnappers or whoever's demanding the money. Let's put it this way, they were negotiating in bad faith from day one. They never delivered a single proof of life. They didn't care about Nancy's safety based on the physical evidence found at the crime scene. Everything they did was in bad faith. It's like negotiating with Iran, it was a complete sham from the start. This isn't just an observation, it's a professional behavioral profile. Because when you remove the ransom notes, the Bitcoin wallet, and the media strategy, what we're left with is a set of actions that never prioritized payment. And if collecting the money was never the real priority, then the question the investigation had to face became something much more uncomfortable. What was the priority? Because a real kidnapping doesn't go public or send letters to TV stations. You go after fast money in silence, and without the police. But this hit the media right away. That very specific decision to make everything visible is one of the most telling details of this criminal case. It indicates that the person behind this either didn't understand how these situations work or knew perfectly well how they operate, and decided to do the opposite on purpose. While the ransom investigation was unfolding publicly in front of everyone, something was happening behind the scenes that very few have managed to connect to the rest of the overall story. The emails exist. They are over 220 messages obtained by the Fox 10 station in Phoenix. They show that before Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, the Pima County Sheriff's Department was in active communication with reality show producers, coordinating access to the police department's internal operations. Those emails reveal something else. The head of homicide and cold cases at the department had been rotated out. This happened a year before the alleged kidnapping. Then Fox News reported that the lead investigator assigned to the Nancy Guthrie case had no prior homicide experience. Listen to that and read it again. The lead investigator on a missing persons case this important in the United States in 2026 had never worked a homicide. On top of that, they released the crime scene before the forensic experts had finished their work. In a case based on microscopic evidence, hairs, skin cells, and DNA transfer. These are traces that last only hours before they degrade. Releasing a scene prematurely isn't just a procedural mistake. It represents the potential difference between getting an answer or leaving a question open forever. Because when you release and re-enter a scene, any evidence collected afterward becomes legally complicated. Defense attorneys can challenge it. The chain of custody gets called into question. Definitive proof becomes debatable. The Pima County Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to question Sheriff Chris Nanos about the management of his department. A recall effort against Nanos is already underway. For a former FBI agent with 25 years of experience, this isn't just a management problem. It's a failure in the investigation and in the information being withheld from the public in this case. He says there's a reason for that. Everyone wants answers, but what's really interesting is something else. There's a segment of the population deeply impacted by what happened to Nancy and who are very disturbed by it. I wanted to start by asking you about some emails that Fox Digital obtained from the Pima County Sheriff's Office. They were working with A&E. They were going to launch a reality show about the work of local officers. On the show, the network would closely follow agents from the Pima Sheriff's Office to document their work. It's pretty interesting, because in the emails, they were trying to get certain videos discussing the body cameras and asking for various personal interviews. One of the responses was that the department had gone through several rotational reassignments of personnel since last year. They basically said the heads of the cold case and homicide units had been transferred to other positions. They were having scheduling problems, which is relevant given what we found out later about what happened to Nancy Guthrie. The sheriff removed a lot of experienced people from their leadership posts for political reasons, from what we can see today. It was people who didn't support him in the election. What's your take on all this coming to light before Nancy? Through these emails long before we knew what was going to end up happening with the Nancy Guthrie case. Yeah, I understand the filming happened before the official murder investigation began. But still, when you write to them and they respond that the rotational reassignments took those people out, it leaves you thinking. You wonder why they use that as an excuse. Normally they'd just say those people no longer hold that position. You know how it goes. Plus, I don't recall the FBI having those famous rotational reassignments for such critical posts. I imagine there will be some exceptions, but when you take a job at that level, you're expected to stay there as long as both parties want it. In that role, and that's something either side can veto. And I think the point is this: we wanted this months ago. We've had access to the same technology for a long time. Again, you wonder if things would have been different with more experienced people in charge of the homicide unit. I wonder if they had sent that hair sample months ago when the FBI first requested it, things would change. Whether the final outcome would have been different. I can't help but think it would have. Look, when the sheriff gets so involved in the details of a case that he himself decides whether we're going to cooperate or not, or whether we're going to collaborate with the FBI on the analysis of one simple tiny hair, imagine what other things he might be sticking his hands into. They say he couldn't really damage the ongoing investigation, that he's just an administrator. Well, guess what? He's making specific, crucial decisions in this criminal case. If I were the sheriff, and my homicide experts refused to send evidence to the FBI lab, we'd be having a serious meeting. We'd want to know exactly why they felt the FBI lab wasn't good enough to do its job. I think this points to clear animosity between the sheriff and the FBI. And it's something that's truly unprecedented. It's unheard of for the FBI to have to say that they asked, and that they always wanted to do things the right way. But the sheriff, for unknown reasons, decided to send the evidence to a lab 3,000 miles away. The FBI knows things and has decided not to share them yet. But Moore was very specific about the reasons behind that. Not because the case is stalled, but because of the direction it's taking right now. There's a big difference between an investigation that has gone cold and one that is simply staying quiet. And those two situations don't look the same from the inside. We're now halfway through this case breakdown. The next section is where the criminal investigation gets significantly more complicated. If you haven't subscribed to American Case File yet, hit that button right now. Every episode here digs deeper than what the headlines say. In this specific case, the most important details are the ones that haven't yet made the front page. There's a central question in this investigation that has divided expert investigators and retired profilers for entire weeks. Was Nancy kidnapped by one person or two? It matters because the answer changes the direction of the search. A lone suspect suggests a certain closeness to Nancy. Someone familiar with the house and her daily routine. Someone who didn't need a second person to handle everything because he knew exactly what to expect upon arrival. That degree of comfort suggests a connection, even if it's very distant or indirect. Two people present something different. There was coordination, a plan between individuals, a shared motive, or a financial agreement. With two people, the risk of a miscommunication, a slip-up, or a detail revealed by accident increases considerably. This is what the physical evidence reveals so far. They found a glove about 2 meters from Nancy's property. From it, they extracted DNA from an unknown male. There was no match in CODIS. They also found mixed DNA inside the house. There was no trace in CODIS either. They collected hair samples from the scene and sent them to the lab for analysis. Former FBI profiler Jim Clemente argued in a previous episode that this was a single attacker. He argued that the blood traces near the front porch indicate that one person controlled the entire situation alone. His logic dictates that if there were two, one would have held Nancy inside, while the other secured their exit from the location. Finding blood on the porch points to a struggle that a single attacker would have had to handle on his own. But Steve Moore doesn't agree. I'm glad some people think it was a single suspect, and that it would have been possible to act alone. Others are 100% convinced that there were at least 2 people involved, maybe 3 or even 4. What's your stance on this? The statement you just made strikes me as absolutely complete and very accurate. There are people who say, with very good reason, that it's hard to imagine a single person committing an act like this. But you can't be too sure. I'm not trying to be ambiguous, but the best investigative organization in the world is having trouble with this case. So I don't want to sit here in front of the camera and say I would have done it differently or better. I don't want to say I think this or that. I consider both theories to be perfectly possible at this point. Statistically, I think it's much more likely that two people were involved. Although when you review the most famous kidnappings in history, we frequently see that they were the work of lone, determined individual. However, when they act alone, the victim is usually a baby or a very young child. Think about it carefully. It's impossible to lead a normal life if you have guests being held against their will inside your own home. Going to work is already stressful, but if a captive tries to escape, a single person can't manage that for very long. Right now, there's only evidence of one individual since he's the only one captured by the front security camera. Of course, that doesn't rule out that they have evidence under wraps in the investigation that we don't yet know about. Maybe shoe prints or some trace of another person. Do you think someone could have taken Nancy alone and put her in a car, or does that necessarily require two people? I watched Jim Clemente on his show and I was fascinated by everything he laid out that day. Jim and I have worked together on several projects, and I have full confidence in his professional judgment and experience. What I'd need to know from Jim is what leads him to think it was a single attacker in order to understand his final conclusion. I don't disagree with his stance, but if he claims there's simply no trace of a second person involved, I'd need more. I mean, what evidence do we have of a single person beyond the camera? If we say there's no video of a second suspect, that alone doesn't mean there weren't more people there. But if Jim says so, I take it very seriously. Two investigators with experience and two different conclusions. Moore's stance is key. He thinks statistically there were two, because he's not basing it on emotion but on patterns of behavior. He works through pattern recognition forged after decades of analyzing criminal cases. But notice he didn't commit. He said you can't blindly put your weight on such uncertain ground. That level of caution from someone with his professional track record can only mean one thing. The evidence still doesn't clearly point in any direction. Everything now depends on the results that come back from the lab. Former FBI Deputy Director John Miller offered a different perspective on the motive for this crime. He suggested that whoever planned this identified Nancy as someone who was, in his words, relatively defenseless against them. She lived alone, was vulnerable, and had ties to someone with money. That angle suggests the attack wasn't random, but calculated. Someone selected her specifically because of the people she was connected to. Savannah Guthrie admitted as much in her first public interview after her mother's disappearance. She confessed to fearing they'd be attacked just for carrying her last name. Then she said something that has remained at the heart of this investigation since day one. She said, "It's unbearable to think that I brought this to her doorstep, that all of this happened because of me." That statement isn't proof, but it reflects what investigators have been quietly examining. There's a possibility that this wasn't about Nancy, but rather that she was the path to someone else, Savannah. While the theories about motive and suspects were advancing, the agents were working on something that didn't depend on assumptions. The physical evidence found at Nancy's house, including a hair, was sent to a private forensic lab in Florida. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed that the Florida lab sent the material to the FBI for analysis. The original hair sample went in that transfer. An FBI official confirmed to ABC News that they had requested the material 2 months ago. But what came next took this case to territory that few investigations reach: a forensic lab in San Francisco. It's the same lab that helped identify Rex Hoyerman, the Gilgo Beach serial killer who murdered women on Long Island. That lab is reportedly now involved in the DNA analysis tied to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. This isn't a routine referral. It's a clear signal because that lab doesn't take on simple or common cases. They only step in when conventional DNA testing fails, and investigators need to use advanced forensic genetic genealogy. They analyze partial matches and use techniques to build family trees from microscopic biological remains. They trace someone's identity through their relatives when there's no direct match in the databases. When that level of sophistication is applied to an investigation, it can only mean one of two things. Either the DNA recovered at the scene was insufficient for a standard match, making these cutting-edge tests necessary, or investigators already have a solid lead, and they're using DNA to confirm it before making an arrest. Both possibilities point to the same conclusion. They're no longer guessing, they're building a solid case. Authorities have stated that results from this level of testing could take months. DNA at this stage doesn't immediately produce names. It points you in a direction that you then follow carefully and methodically, so the evidence holds up in court. Because a courtroom is precisely where the FBI says this case is headed. Since Nancy disappeared, investigators' public communication has been extremely measured and controlled. At times, it seemed the investigation had stalled, with no press conferences, no new leads, and no official suspects. There have been no answers to the questions that have piled up over 87 days of anguish. But there's a crucial difference that's often lost in the noise of cases like this, and it's the most vital distinction in the entire story. There's a big difference between an investigation that has gone quiet and one that has truly gone cold. One means there's nothing to tell. The other means there's something valuable to protect. The FBI's public stance and refusal to name suspects or release evidence doesn't reflect a lack of progress. It reflects preparation. Because everything collected in an investigation has to be able to withstand any scrutiny. Every piece of evidence has to be handled in a way that's impossible to challenge in the future. Every lead has to be followed, leaving an impeccable, completely clean documentary trail for the legal process. None of that work gets announced. It simply gets preserved. Are you surprised that we still don't have an identified vehicle in this case? Yes, I'm very surprised, Brian. With today's world and the technology of doorbell cameras on people's homes, plus the fact that a large percentage of the older adult population uses these security cameras. I'm not saying everyone in Catalina Hills was elderly, but a large portion of the residents were. I'm amazed we don't have more concrete information on that suspect vehicle. Regarding the white car they're talking about, you have to analyze the technology and determine whether it really was that color. Was it beige, or maybe light blue? Those are tough details on cameras, configured to see relatively well in the dark. The camera distorts certain tones, so I'd say it looked white, but I'm very surprised we haven't seen it. Is there any chance they already have the car and aren't releasing it, for some strategic reason? Yes and yes. At the Bureau, a lot of things like this happen where suddenly a new piece of evidence comes to light. And then the FBI tells the world they had it since day 4 or 5. We're not on the list for the daily case updates that go to the director. The FBI and authorities in general are only going to release what they consider strictly necessary. They're not a media company. They're an investigative and prosecutorial organization. Responding to the press is a necessary requirement, but they only meet the minimum standard required. That's why when they released the first photos of the suspect captured by the front camera, and it was Kash Patel himself who decided to put them out there. I thought they don't usually act that way unless it's unavoidable. It's not something they just do for the heck of it. I can tell you with authority that's just how things work. And it's not because the FBI looks down on the public. It's not that the agents don't want people to know. The FBI wants it to be known. They want everything about the case to be revealed, down to the smallest detail. They want it all to come out at trial. They're not hiding anything. They're preparing for a trial where they'll tell everything, because that's where the public has the absolute right to know. We have public trials. We don't have investigations that are public. Those are the two differences. Public trials, but not investigations open to the public. That approach is key because it reveals the FBI's current stance better than any press release could. They're not confused at all. They're not wasting time. They're putting together a case that will eventually be presented before a judge and jury. That means every decision being made right now is being made with that crucial moment exclusively in mind. The Pima County Sheriff's Department officially confirmed that the investigation will remain active until Nancy Guthrie is located. Nearly 40,000 tips from the public have been received throughout the entire investigation. The current reward stands at $1.1 million. $1 million from the Guthrie family and $100,000 from the FBI. The DNA is at Quantico and at the San Francisco lab undergoing testing. As of today, day 87, Nancy Guthrie remains missing. No suspect has been publicly named. No motive has been confirmed on the record. The investigation involves several agencies, including the Pima Sheriff, the FBI Customs and Border Protection, and federal prosecutors from the United States Attorney's Office in Tucson. The trial against Derek Kella, the man accused of sending fake ransom messages to the Guthrie family, will begin on June 23rd in Tucson. His proceedings are unrelated to the kidnapping, but they serve as a reminder of the huge impact this case has had on people. The real case includes a masked suspect, on video blood on a porch, and an investigation that isn't stopping. A pacemaker that went silent at 2:28 in the morning, and DNA being analyzed at the country's most advanced forensic labs. The process keeps moving forward. Sheriff Nanos told investigators he believed he knew the motive for the crime from the start. He hasn't shared it publicly. Withholding that information is either a strategic protection of the investigation or one of the most consequential decisions made in this case. Reaching day 87, this is what we're left with. A message appeared in a Bitcoin wallet on February 10th. Someone reached out saying they were ready to talk. But on the other side, there was only complete silence. In the weeks that followed, investigators have been working in silence, the way the FBI always does before charging someone. They build the case, analyze the evidence, and wait for the moment when everything connects and the picture is clear enough to act. That moment hasn't come yet, but the DNA is at Quantico. Agents close to the case affirm that it's being prepared for trial. Between the February 10th message and the lab results, the answer about Nancy Guthrie's fate already exists somewhere. It just hasn't been revealed yet. And that's the part that leaves you with a deep sense of unease. It's not the questions about the suspects, the motives, or how many people were involved in the crime. Those questions will be answered sooner or later. What really weighs on you is the silence itself, because it belongs to someone. Someone who knows exactly what happened in that house between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning. Someone who has watched the case unfold and has decided for 87 days not to say a single word. Cases like this don't go unsolved forever. Evidence can degrade, but it doesn't disappear entirely. People talk, mistakes happen, and the FBI is preparing now in the way you do when you're almost ready. When that moment comes, we'll be here. If this episode revealed something to you, a new angle or a loose end you tied together, don't forget to share it. Write in the comments what you think happened. Subscribe. We'll reconstruct the final hours before fate changed.